Number 15. The voice from the afterlife. Do you believe that we have a soul that continues to exist after death? A soul that is immortal? What we are about to show you is not a made-up story. This horrifying incident actually happened. And to this day, it remains one of the most mysterious cases in the world. In March 2015, an accident occurred in Spanish Fork, Utah, that pushed even experienced first responders to the limits of their rational worldview. 25-year-old Lynn Grosbeck was driving home with her young daughter Lily when she lost control of her car on an icy night. Her vehicle broke through a guardrail, flipped over, and landed upside down in a river. Lynn died instantly. Her daughter Lily, just 18 months old, survived, but she was trapped in her car seat, hanging upside down as freezing water filled the vehicle. For nearly 14 hours, the car remained partially submerged, unnoticed, hidden in the darkness. Lily was completely alone. No one knew she was still there. The next day, a passerby discovered the vehicle and alerted the police. Several police officers and firefighters fought their way through the river to reach the wreck. Their strength was already failing when something happened that, to this day, no one can explain. Truly, no one. The men independently reported hearing a clear, urgent female voice. It called out, "Help me! Help me!" The words were so unmistakable that everyone immediately believed someone inside the car was still alive. They shouted back, "We're coming! Hang on!" and pushed themselves with everything they had left. But when they finally opened the vehicle, they found Lynn Grosbeck. It was determined that she had been dead for many hours. Only little Lily was still alive, hypothermic, weak, but alive. At the exact moment the rescuers were close to giving up, they had heard that desperate voice that made them keep going. And here's the strange part. It wasn't just one person's account. Multiple police officers and firefighters swore they had all heard the same female voice, clear and distinct, cutting through the sound of the rushing water. To them, it wasn't a hallucination, not imagination. It was absolutely real. The story caused a worldwide sensation. CNN, The Washington Post, and the BBC all reported on it extensively. The rescuers themselves admitted in interviews that this mysterious experience still haunts them to this day. One of the officers said, "We all heard the same voice, but we know that no one except the baby was still alive." So how is something like this even possible? Was it actually the spirit of Lynn Grosbeck urging the rescuers on so her daughter could survive? Maybe it was that very cry for help that saved Lily's life. Without the voice, the rescuers might not have fought as hard. And maybe it was the final will of a mother to protect her child, a force far stronger than death itself. A beautiful thought. Many near-death and ghost studies describe a strange phenomenon. Souls often remain for a while at the place where they died. Some souls don't immediately realize that they are truly dead. They continue to act as if they are still part of life. Could that be exactly what happened in the case of Lynn Grosbeck? Was her soul still with her daughter, trying to save her, without even realizing she had already died? Or was it one final act of motherly love, so powerful that it overcame death itself? The idea that a mother's love can reach beyond death and cross an invisible bridge to the living is deeply moving. So, was it a miracle? Or could it be proof that physical death is not the end of our existence? And this is only the beginning. The truly shocking cases are still ahead. Before we continue, a quick question for you. Do you believe that we truly continue to exist after death? Simply write yes or no in the comments below. We're very curious to hear your answers. Number 14. Flight 401, The Ghost Pilots. The next case sounds like a horror movie, yet it is based on real events. On December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades. More than 100 people lost their lives, including Captain Robert Bob Loft and flight engineer Donald Don Repo. But the truly unsettling part began only after the disaster. Parts recovered from the crashed aircraft were reused as spare components and installed in other jets in the fleet. Shortly afterward, mysterious reports began to pile up. Flight attendants and pilots suddenly saw unfamiliar men in uniforms, men who were not listed on any crew manifest. They stood in cockpits or cabins, looked serious, and then vanished right before the witnesses' eyes. Most shocking of all, some of these apparitions appeared to deliver warnings. On one occasion, Captain Loft was reportedly seen standing silently in the cabin shortly before technical problems occurred on board. How chilling must that have been? One particularly bizarre incident involved the aircraft's intercom. Several crew members reported suddenly hearing Donald Repo's voice over the system, even though no one in the cockpit had pressed the talk button. His words sounded urgent, almost cautionary. He warned that a fire would break out in the galley. Shortly afterward, smoke was indeed discovered. For the crew, there was no doubt. The voice belonged to Repo, whom they recognized from photos and past encounters. The idea that a deceased man spoke through the loudspeakers of a passenger aircraft was deeply disturbing and impossible to explain. Some passengers even panicked because of it. The sightings became so frequent that Eastern Airlines launched internal investigations. Officially, however, no one liked to talk about it. For a major airline, ghost pilots were a nightmare for the company's image. Even so, entire crews independently reported describing the exact same apparitions. The strange part, after the reused spare parts were removed from the affected aircraft, the sightings suddenly stopped, as if the presence of the two deceased men had transferred along with the components to the new planes. Pretty crazy. The case later became world famous through the book The Ghost of Flight 401 and even inspired films and TV series. But for many eyewitnesses, it was more than just a spooky story. To them, the apparitions were absolutely real. What exactly were Captain Robert Bob Loft and flight engineer Donald Don Repo trying to communicate to the passengers and crew? Did their souls find peace only after the parts from the crashed aircraft were removed from the other planes? After all, the ghosts of Loft and Repo appeared only in aircraft that had parts from the ill-fated flight installed. Does that mean something like an immortal soul truly exists? And that a part of our soul can even attach itself to objects, with not even death able to sever that bond? A very intriguing thought. But this is nothing compared to what awaits you next. Subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. It's completely free and helps us continue making videos like this. Thank you. Number 13. The incredible near-death experience of Pam Reynolds. There are stories so unbelievable that they leave even experienced doctors speechless. One of them is the case of Pam Reynolds, a singer from Atlanta. In 1991, she faced a surgery that was considered almost impossible to survive. Pam suffered from a life-threatening aneurysm at the base of her skull, a bulge in a critical artery in the brain. If it had ruptured, it would have caused instant death. Her only chance was an extremely risky procedure known as hypothermic cardiac arrest surgery. During this operation, the body is literally brought into a state that closely resembles death. Doctors cooled Pam's body down to just 15 degrees Celsius. Her heartbeat was stopped, her breathing shut down, and the blood was completely drained from her brain to make the operation possible. For that period, she was clinically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity. Her eyes were taped shut, and her hearing was blocked with special ear inserts that emitted clicking sounds to monitor any remaining brain activity. Under these conditions, it was 100% impossible for her to perceive anything. And yet, during this very phase, the unthinkable happened. Pam later reported that she suddenly left her body. She saw herself from above, as if she were floating near the ceiling and looking down at the operating table. This phenomenon is known as an out-of-body experience. People describe perceiving their consciousness as separate from the body. They see and hear even though their physical senses are completely shut down. Pam later described in detail how the doctors began the operation. She saw her chest being opened. She heard fragments of conversation among the surgeons, including the mention of a specific instrument. She even described the surgical tools precisely, small circular saws that she compared to electric toothbrushes. Details she could not possibly have known, since she was under deep anesthesia, with no brain activity and no functioning sensory organs. Even more bizarre, she later described where each doctor was standing in the operating room, who performed which task, and the exact moments certain instruments were used. When she told the doctors these details after the surgery, they were stunned. Her descriptions matched perfectly. For medicine, this is a mystery. In that condition, she should not even have been able to dream, let alone make such clear and verifiable observations. Zero brain activity, cardiac arrest, body temperature lowered to 15 degrees. And yet, Pam experienced a reality she could later describe with measurable accuracy. Later, Pam also spoke of moving through a tunnel and seeing a bright light filled with warmth and love. She encountered deceased relatives who encouraged her to return, telling her that her time had not yet come. Does that mean it is already determined when we will die? For Pam, this was not a hallucination, but an experience of profound clarity, even clearer than normal waking consciousness. This case is one of the most well-known and best documented near-death experiences ever recorded. Doctors examined it in medical journals, psychologists analyzed it, skeptics tried to explain it. But the core question remains: how could a woman with no measurable brain activity have such precise perceptions? Is consciousness independent of the brain? Is our body merely like a spacesuit we need in order to experience life on Earth, just as we need a spacesuit to explore outer space? Pam Reynolds' story is a powerful example suggesting that what we call death may be nothing more than a transition. An absolutely fascinating story. Hard to believe? Then wait until you hear the next case. Number 12. The Soldier's Widow. A message from the frontline phone. The next case sounds like a legend, yet it is documented multiple times and has been examined by historians. During the Second World War, a young woman in England received an unexpected phone call. On the other end of the line was the voice of her husband, who was serving as a soldier at the front. His words were calm and loving, almost as if he were saying goodbye. What makes this so unbelievable? The call came about an hour after the officially recorded time of her husband's death. According to military records, he was definitely no longer alive at that moment. The widow later explained that she immediately knew who was speaking on the line. It wasn't just her husband's familiar voice. It was the way he spoke, the words he chose, the closeness she felt. He addressed her by her tender nickname and spoke with a warmth she had missed deeply since his departure. That very familiarity left no doubt. It was her husband, and he had found a way to reach her, even though he had long since fallen in battle. The call was later confirmed by neighbors who were in the house at the time and heard the phone ring. These witnesses later reported that the woman appeared deeply shaken, yet strangely composed. She said her husband had emphasized over the phone that he was fine, that she should not be afraid, and that they would see each other again one day. Then, the line abruptly went dead. No interference, no static, just silence. Such reports of so-called death calls were by no means isolated during the Second World War. Again and again, family members describe receiving an inexplicable message at the exact hour a soldier died. Sometimes as a voice, sometimes as a knock at the door, or as a sudden appearance in a dream. Especially striking, however, were the cases in which the messages came through technical devices like telephones or radios. This made the experiences more verifiable, because other witnesses could be present. That is why the case of the soldier's widow stands out. It is one of the rare reports that does not rely solely on subjective feelings, but involved other people who witnessed the event. That is precisely what makes it one of the most powerful and credible examples of a message from the afterlife to this day. In the case of the fallen soldier's wife, it was especially unsettling because the message came through an ordinary telephone, a device associated with everyday life, not the supernatural. To this day, it remains unclear how something like this could have been possible. Was it a final, desperate attempt by her husband to reach the woman he loved? Or does a brief channel open at the moment of death, allowing messages to pass between worlds? Did this soldier's words truly cross the boundary of death, traveling straight through a phone line into his wife's ear? A deeply moving story. At this point, we are inevitably forced to ask the following questions. Is there life after death? Is there something like a soul that is immortal? What comes next will change how you see life and death forever. Number 11. Reincarnation. Children who remember their past lives. Few questions are as fascinating as this one. Do we return after death? Not in another world, but in a new body, in a new life? That is exactly what the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia set out to investigate. And what they discovered about reincarnation is so astonishing that it may change how we see death forever. Since the 1960s, researchers led by Dr. Ian Stevenson collected cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives. Later, his successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, continued this work. This vast archive now includes more than 2,500 documented cases. What makes this so remarkable is that these are not vague claims, but detailed memories, often reported by children between the ages of 2 and 5, at an age when they could hardly have absorbed complex information from books or films. Many of these children described names, locations, and causes of death. Some were able to identify former homes or relatives with striking accuracy. Others displayed birthmarks or scars that precisely matched the injuries they claimed had caused their death in a previous life. It is exactly these verifiable details that make the collection so extraordinarily valuable and unique. One especially striking example is the story of Andrew Lucas. As a toddler, he began talking about his airplane. He described flying over enemy territory during a war and being shot down. His descriptions were disturbingly specific. He spoke about particular aircraft types, uniforms, and procedures in the Air Force. His parents were baffled. He was far too young to know such things. Later, historical research uncovered records that matched his accounts with astonishing precision. Particularly noticeable was Andrew's intense fear of engine noises and airplanes, a fear that perfectly aligned with a death caused by a crash. Andrew repeatedly mentioned a specific location until his parents finally took him there, and it turned out to be the exact place where he had been buried. There, with tears in his eyes, Andrew pointed to a grave and said it was his own, with a certainty that sent chills down everyone's spine. His parents were shocked. For his family, it felt as if he were reliving not just fragments, but the entire drama of a past life. Equally impressive is the case of Edward Austrian. From an early age, he complained of severe pain in his throat, without doctors initially finding a clear cause. Again and again, he told his family that he remembered being in the First World War. He described scenes from the front, uniforms and weapons, and said he had died from a gunshot wound to the throat. The unbelievable part, Edward actually had a tumor in his throat. But after he repeatedly spoke about and processed these memories, something happened that even doctors could not explain. The tumor disappeared. For his family, this was no coincidence, but a sign that working through his past experience was connected to his healing. These two remarkable cases are just two out of more than 2,500 documented examples. Some children recalled only small details, others entire life stories. Often the memories faded as the children grew older, but while they lasted, they were terrifyingly precise and impossible for parents to explain. The researchers at the Division of Perceptual Studies followed a strict methodology. They interviewed families, verified historical records, and searched for plausible explanations. And time and again, they encountered cases in which the children's statements matched verifiable facts, facts the child could never have known through ordinary means. This raises a profound question. Is consciousness more than just a product of the brain? Does something of us, memories, experiences, perhaps our soul, survive death and find its way into a new body? Reincarnation is an ancient idea, deeply rooted in many religions. But when even a renowned university like Virginia has collected thousands of cases over decades that cannot be easily dismissed, we are forced to ask, are these merely coincidences and imagination, or genuine proof of continued existence? Are children perhaps more sensitive to these memories because they are closer to birth, and therefore closer to the transition between two existences? And when these memories fade during childhood, is that the moment we fully settle into our current life, while traces of the former one disappear? More than 2,500 voices from around the world tell the same story at its core. Physical death is not the end. It is only a gateway, and consciousness moves on into a new chapter. An absolutely fascinating thought. If this already fascinated you, just wait until you hear what comes next. Number 10. The Freddie Jackson photo, the face of the dead. Sometimes a single image is enough to raise more questions than 1,000 words. In 1919, shortly after the end of the First World War, a unit of the Royal Air Force posed for a group photograph. It was meant to be a simple keepsake, a reminder of the camaraderie among the men who had survived the war. But when the photograph was developed, they discovered something that deeply disturbed them. Between the faces of the soldiers appeared a figure that should not have been there at all. Clearly visible was the face of Freddie Jackson, a mechanic from the unit. The problem: Freddie had died in an accident 2 days before the photo was taken. He had been fatally struck by an aircraft propeller, just as the men were preparing to return to everyday life. The comrades who had known him for years were immediately certain. They recognized his facial features, his expression, and even the familiar way he peeked out from behind another soldier. Exactly how he liked to appear in photos during his lifetime. To them, it was not a blurry silhouette, nor a trick of the light. It was Freddie, standing with them one last time. The photo soon began to circulate, first within the RAF, later in history books and works on paranormal phenomena. To this day, it is considered one of the most famous ghost photographs in the world. Skeptics attribute it to double exposure or technical errors during development, which were not uncommon in the early days of photography. But these explanations failed to convince many, especially not the men who had known Freddie personally for years. For them, the message was clear. Their comrade had managed to be part of the final group photo despite his death. Perhaps he wanted to show that the bond between soldiers and friends is stronger than death. What does this photograph really mean? Was it proof that powerful emotional bonds accompany us beyond death? Or that a part of our consciousness can cling so strongly to a moment that it imprints itself onto an image? Who knows? If you think you've already heard everything, the next case will surprise you. Number 9. Robin Alexis, the medium who speaks with unborn children. There are many reports of people who claim to make contact with the deceased. But what if a medium says she can speak with souls who have not even been born yet? That is exactly what Robin Alexis does, a U.S. radio and television personality known in spiritual circles as the Spirit Lady. Since 2005, she has hosted the show Mystic Radio, where she advises callers, guides them through past life regressions, and delivers messages from the spiritual realm. The part of her work that draws the most attention is called Metaphysical Mother, the Metaphysical Mother. Robin claims that she can hear and feel the voices and energies of souls who have not yet entered this world. She says she speaks with babies growing in the womb, with newborns who cannot yet speak, and even with souls who were never born due to miscarriage or abortion. For many parents experiencing grief and uncertainty, This sounds like a gateway to an invisible, yet deeply real connection. On her website, Robin describes it this way: "I speak with the souls of children who are still unborn in the womb, or who are newly born and not yet able to speak." Her sessions often involve conversations with mothers who want to know why a pregnancy failed, or whether their unborn child is ready to enter life. Some parents ask whether their child's soul consciously chose them, and Robin provides answers that many find profoundly moving. One example from her radio shows: a woman called in, devastated after experiencing 2 miscarriages in a row. Robin explained that the child's soul was still with her, but had not yet been ready to enter life. She said that the same soul might return once the mother was emotionally stronger. This message gave the woman hope, and she later gave birth to a healthy child. Coincidence or not, for the mother, it was proof that Robin had spoken the truth. Other accounts describe Robin delivering messages to parents that she could not possibly have known. In one case, she accurately described the favorite name of an unborn child, a name the mother had never mentioned publicly. For the parents, this was undeniable proof that Robin had truly been in contact with a soul. What is especially remarkable is that Robin Alexis does not focus only on the moment of birth, but also on the time before and after it. She appears to view souls as beings that exist before taking on a body, and that continue to exist even if they are never born. For many parents who have endured the pain of miscarriage, this idea is deeply comforting. Their child is not gone, but still present in another dimension. But her work also raises deeper questions. If souls truly connect with us before birth, what does that mean for our understanding of life and death? Does our existence not begin at birth, but perhaps long before? Do souls themselves decide which life they will enter? Of course, there are skeptics who dismiss such claims as wishful thinking. They argue that grieving parents are especially vulnerable to comforting messages. But even critics cannot deny that many families have found peace and healing through Robin's work. The idea that a medium could form a bridge to unborn souls is extraordinary, and it opens an entirely new perspective on the question of when life truly begins. For parents who have experienced Robin's sessions, it is no longer a question. For them, one thing remains certain: their child was always with them, even if it never entered this world. A deeply moving thought. Who knows, perhaps it was our own decision which circumstances, which family, and which parents we would be born into. Maybe we should take a moment to consider that there may be a very specific reason why we chose this particular life. Perhaps we are here to learn something, or to experience something unique. But the next phenomenon will completely overshadow everything you have heard so far. Number 8. Phone calls from the dead. Voices from the afterlife. Imagine sitting alone in your apartment one evening. Suddenly the phone rings. You pick it up, and on the other end, you hear the voice of a loved one. But there's a problem. That person has been dead for a long time. What would you think in that moment? Losing your mind, a cruel prank, or a real message from another world? Exactly such cases were collected by the American parapsychologist D. Scott Rogo. Together with Raymond Bayless, he published the book Phone Calls from the Dead in 1979. It describes dozens of stories from people who received calls from the deceased, often with familiar voices, sometimes accompanied by strange interference on the line, and almost always ending suddenly and abruptly. One of the most well-known cases involves a man who received a phone call one evening that he would never forget. On the other end was a woman using a nickname known only within his family. It was the affectionate pet name of his aunt, who had been dead for some time. The voice was unmistakably hers, warm, familiar, full of life. She spoke to him, asked how he was doing, as if nothing had happened, and then calmly said goodbye. But the moment the conversation ended, he heard only a strange crackling sound, and then absolute silence. For the man, there was no doubt. No one outside the family knew that nickname. It had to be his aunt, who had somehow found her way back to give him one last moment of closeness. How is something like that even possible? Another case is almost even more shocking. A woman received a phone call from her best friend, just one day after his fatal car accident. She recognized his voice immediately, clear and undistorted. He apologized for leaving so suddenly and asked her to stay strong. Words filled with love and sorrow, spoken through a telephone, even though he was already dead. Shortly afterward, the call ended abruptly. No signal, no sound of hanging up, just complete emptiness on the line. Only later did the woman learn that her friend had died many hours before the call. For her, there were no rational explanations. It was the voice of a dead man, and she had heard it through an ordinary telephone. And this is where the real question begins. How can something like this happen? Are our modern devices perhaps more sensitive than we realize, like bridges that allow energies and voices from another level to make themselves known? Some researchers suspect that electricity and radio waves could play a role because they may be more easily influenced. Others believe that in moments of intense emotion, such as sudden death, a person may have the power to pierce reality for a brief instant. But what does this actually mean? Can the deceased really use technical devices to contact us? Could the phone we hold in our hands every day become, at a critical moment, a gateway between the world of the living and the afterlife? Rogo collected many such cases, and the patterns were strikingly similar. Familiar voices appearing out of nowhere, often accompanied by faint interference or crackling on the line, and then a sudden end, as if the connection between worlds had been severed. Is it just coincidence? A trick of the mind? Or could this be genuine proof that the boundary between life and death is far more fragile than we ever imagined? A deeply fascinating and deeply unsettling phenomenon. But what comes next is so extraordinary that you will want to listen to it at least twice. Number 7. The hand on the mirror. The case you are about to see is hard to believe, yet it truly happened exactly as described. It is a real, well-documented event that strongly suggests that death is not the end of our existence. Imagine walking into your bathroom on an ordinary morning, and suddenly a clear handprint appears on the mirror. Not just any print, but one so detailed that every pattern, every line is visible, almost like an X-ray image. What would you do if you knew that this print did not come from a living person? That is exactly what Janice Heapy Durham experienced. She was a successful publisher at the Sacramento Bee, not a woman known for ghost stories or superstition. But everything changed when her husband, Max, died of cancer in 2004. A loss that completely derailed her life, and, in a deeply unsettling way, did not mark the end of her connection to her husband. On the first anniversary of his death, Janice entered the bathroom expecting nothing unusual. But then her gaze froze on the mirror. There was a handprint, not smudged, not blurry, but razor-sharp. Pale, almost powdery, so detailed that every line and ridge of the palm was visible, almost like a medical X-ray image. She ran her fingers over the glass, trying in disbelief to wipe it away. But the print remained. It was too clear, too precise to have been caused by chance or ordinary condensation. In that moment, she knew that something supernatural had occurred, and it did not happen just once. Year after year, always around the anniversaries of Max's death, new marks appeared. Sometimes it was another handprint, sometimes mysterious light patterns or diffuse shapes that formed on mirrors and walls as if guided by an invisible hand. Especially striking was one imprint that looked as if someone were gently pressing a hand against the mirror from the other side, as if to say, "I am here." For Janice, this was not a random reflection, but a direct message from the afterlife. She felt her husband's presence as if he were still standing beside her, beyond the invisible boundary between life and death. A deeply comforting thought. She began documenting the phenomena immediately, taking photographs and writing down her experiences. Eventually, she published her book, The Hand on the Mirror, a true story of life beyond death. In it, she describes how these events radically changed her worldview. From a rational businesswoman, she became a witness to the unexplainable. The mirror became a gateway between worlds, a place where the hand of her deceased husband touched her year after year. Just imagine that. A crystal-clear message from another level of existence, right in the middle of everyday life, on a cold glass surface. Unbelievable. Was this handprint a definitive sign from the afterlife? So does this mean there is real proof that our deceased loved ones can still reach us after death? A beautiful, yet somehow unsettling thought. The next case sounds like something out of a movie, with the crucial difference that it is real and well documented. Number 6. The case of David Morehouse, remote viewing and messages from the dead. What if a high-ranking U.S. officer suddenly claimed to have made contact with the dead? What if these encounters did not happen in a dream or a vision, but in the middle of a top-secret CIA espionage program? It sounds like a science fiction movie, but this is a real documented event. The case of David Morehouse is one of the most puzzling stories of the Cold War, and it raises the gripping question of whether the CIA unintentionally gathered proof of life after death. David Morehouse was no unknown figure. He was a highly decorated U.S. Army officer, a paratrooper, a graduate of the legendary Ranger School, and the recipient of numerous awards, a man who believed deeply in duty, honor, and discipline. But in 1987, everything changed when he was seriously wounded in the head by a sniper's bullet during a training exercise. He survived in an almost miraculous way, but later said that from that moment on, his consciousness had fundamentally changed. Shortly after his recovery, Morehouse was assigned to a top-secret project known to only a few, the CIA's Stargate program. There, researchers studied so-called remote viewing, a technique in which individuals used their consciousness to obtain information about distant locations, objects, or people. During the Cold War, this was considered a potential secret weapon for spying on the enemy. But soon, Morehouse experienced something that did not fit the military mission. During a remote viewing session, a figure suddenly appeared that was not part of the target coordinates. It was a young soldier in full uniform, with an empty stare. Morehouse immediately knew that this man was dead. And then, the unthinkable happened. The soldier walked straight toward him, locked eyes with him, and spoke clearly and distinctly. The words echoed in Morehouse's mind. "Tell them we are not gone. We are still here." It was not a blurry image, not a faint whisper. Morehouse described the encounter as so intensely real that it felt as if he were truly standing face to face with a deceased person. For a rational officer, it was an experience that deeply shattered his worldview. And it did not stop with that single encounter. In another session, he suddenly sensed a familiar presence, his grandmother, who had died years earlier. She spoke to him in the same loving yet firm voice he remembered from his childhood. Her message was clear. He must have the courage to bring the truth about these experiments into the open, even if it cost him everything. For Morehouse, this was not a dream, but an encounter marked by clarity and closeness. These experiences became a turning point for him. He realized that the Stargate program had not only opened a door to intelligence gathering, but to a dimension beyond space, time, and even beyond death. In his later book, Psychic Warrior, he wrote, "I came to understand that humans are not merely physical beings. We are consciousness, and that consciousness does not end with physical death." A statement that still resonates today. For the CIA, however, these aspects were unwanted. The agency was not interested in spiritual experiences, only in military results. But Morehouse could no longer suppress what he had experienced. Voices, messages, encounters with the dead. They had become part of the program, whether anyone admitted it or not. Eventually, he broke his silence and brought his astonishing experiences to the public. So did the CIA actually uncover proof of life after death in its top-secret projects? Is our consciousness truly capable of making contact with the world of the dead? An absolutely fascinating thought. It already sounds insane, but the next case is even more unbelievable. Number 5. The Greenbrier Ghost, the spirit who testified in court. Sometimes reality writes stories that even a screenwriter could never invent. One of those stories unfolded in 1897 in the small community of Greenbrier County. There lived a young woman named Elva Zona Heister, who had only recently married the blacksmith Erasmus Stribling Troutshoe. What seemed like a new beginning soon turned into a tragedy. On January 23, 1897, Zona was found dead in her home. At first, it appeared to be an accident. Her body lay at the foot of the stairs, and the doctor recorded the cause of death as sudden heart failure. Her husband insisted on dressing her immediately in a long gown with a high collar, preventing any further examination. Everything seemed settled, but in truth, the story was only just beginning. Because Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heister, was convinced from the start that her daughter had not simply died. She felt there was more to it. And then, only weeks after the death, she began experiencing nighttime apparitions. According to her account, her daughter's figure appeared to her again and again. In these encounters, Zona told her that her death had not been an accident. Her husband, Troutshoe, had strangled her during an argument. To prove it, the spirit repeatedly twisted her head in the visions until it turned completely around, a sign of a broken neck. For 4 consecutive nights, Zona appeared so vividly that Mary Jane became convinced she had witnessed a murder revealed from beyond the grave. She went to the local prosecutor and described the visions. Unbelievably but true, he took her statements seriously. Zona's body was exhumed. The autopsy revealed that her neck was indeed broken and her windpipe crushed by force, exactly as the spirit had described. Suddenly, Shue became the prime suspect. The case went to trial, and here something truly unique happened. Mary Jane Heister testified under oath that her daughter had appeared to her as a spirit and revealed the truth about her death. The judge allowed this testimony, and the jury listened attentively. Although skeptics dismissed the visions as imagination, there was additional evidence against Shue. In the end, he was found guilty of murdering his wife and sentenced to life in prison. To this day, the Greenbrier Ghost remains the only known case in U.S. history in which a ghost was officially cited as a witness in a court of law. A chilling thought. A murder was solved because the victim herself, from the afterlife, led her mother to the truth. Was it truly the spirit of Elva Zona Heister that brought the truth to light? Or was it a mother's unshakable conviction, so powerful that it compelled the justice system to act? One thing is certain. The Greenbrier Ghost is a unique case that still stands in history books and paranormal research as evidence that the boundary between life and death may not be as firmly sealed as we believe. An absolutely fascinating and deeply unsettling story. What comes next will push us to the very limits of what we think is possible. Number 4. Rosemary Brown, the woman who received music from the afterlife. At first glance, Rosemary Brown seemed entirely ordinary, a simple housewife from London with no formal musical training and no special talent at the piano. But in the 1960s and 1970s, she came forward with an astonishing claim that shook the music world. Some of the greatest composers of all time were speaking through her, from the afterlife. What a curious claim. Until then, Rosemary had lived a modest life. She could play the piano a little, but she had never received any musical education, let alone training in composition. Then one day, she said she was visited by none other than Franz Liszt. the legendary 19th century composer, who instructed her to write down his unfinished works. From that moment on, Rosemary Brown filled notebook after notebook with sheet music. She said Liszt dictated the pieces to her, but other great names soon followed. Frédéric Chopin, Ludwig van Beethoven, Franz Schubert, Johann Sebastian Bach, even Claude Debussy and Sergei Rachmaninoff. Each of them, she claimed, transmitted new compositions to her, written in their distinctive styles. What made this truly remarkable? Numerous music experts confirmed that the works were indeed composed in the authentic style of the respective composers. Some pieces were so technically demanding that Rosemary herself could not even play them. Critics who attempted to expose her as a fraud were forced to admit something unsettling. A woman without formal training could never have invented these works. It was simply not possible. The BBC invited her to interviews and television programs. There, she demonstrated live how she received new pieces of music, often at a pace that left professional composers stunned. Sometimes she wrote down notes at lightning speed. Other times, she played passages on the piano that she claimed were being transmitted to her by Chopin or Liszt in that very moment. Particularly striking was the fact that detailed analysis revealed numerous stylistic nuances typical of the individual composers, specific harmonies, fingerings, or chord progressions that Rosemary could not possibly have known. Some musicians said it felt as if the great masters were truly continuing to compose, beyond death. Her story sparked not only amazement, but intense debate among experts. Some suggested that Rosemary possessed an unconscious talent she herself underestimated. Others believed it was self-deception or the result of deep immersion in classical music. But the central question remained: how could a simple housewife with no training produce such complex and authentic-sounding works? Until her death in 2001, Rosemary remained firm in her account. She was merely the medium, the scribe of the great composers. For her, it was not imagination, but direct proof that the soul continues to exist and to act after death. Was Rosemary Brown an exceptionally gifted woman who never recognized her own genius? Or was she truly the bridge through which Liszt, Beethoven, and Chopin continued to bring their music into the world? A very intriguing question. And the next case will change everything you think you know about death. Number 3. Michael Sabom, the cardiologist's near-death cases. There are many reports of near-death experiences, but how do we separate imagination from verifiable reality? That was exactly the compelling question posed by the American cardiologist Michael Sabom in the 1970s and 1980s. As a heart specialist, he often treated patients who had come extremely close to death, and he began to document their accounts systematically. Dr. Sabom's work is so significant because it compared medical records with patient testimony and uncovered astonishing matches. Sabom noticed that many patients, after being resuscitated, reported remarkable experiences they claimed to have had during clinical death. They floated above their bodies, heard conversations, saw medical equipment, and later described in great detail what doctors and nurses had done. At first, Sabom assumed these were simply memories or imagination. But the more he investigated, the clearer it became. Some of these accounts contained medical details the patients could not possibly have known. In his later book, Recollections of Death, Sabom described dozens of such cases. One patient, for example, was able to describe precisely how electrodes were placed during resuscitation, which instruments were used, and even where exactly the doctors were standing in the room. This information could not have come from everyday knowledge, yet it matched the medical procedures perfectly. Even more striking, however, was a case in which a patient was unconscious during surgery and could not have had any perception at all. Later, he reported seeing the doctors standing over his body and observing himself from the outside. He described not only the equipment, but also a remark one of the physicians made during the operation, a side comment that only the surgical team could have heard. For Sabom, this was a turning point. As a cardiologist, he knew how quickly the brain loses conscious perception without oxygen. Normally, unconsciousness sets in after just seconds, and after a few minutes, irreversible damage occurs. Yet here were patients making precise observations during exactly that window, as if their consciousness were operating independently of the body. Of course, his research was met with skepticism. Some colleagues dismissed the experiences as coincidence or retrospective reconstruction, but the precision of many descriptions could not be easily brushed aside. Sabom himself reached a fascinating conclusion. Near-death experiences provide strong indications that consciousness is more than just a function of the brain. So what does this mean in concrete terms? Does our consciousness truly leave the body in critical moments? Does the soul float freely for a short time, independent of physical limits? An extremely intriguing thought, one that could change everything. Dr. Michael Sabom's cases remain among the best documented evidence suggesting that near-death experiences are not mere hallucinations, but genuine indicators of consciousness continuing beyond physical death. A truly profound insight. Hard to believe? Then wait until you hear what comes next. Number 2. Diane Archangel, Messages from the Afterlife. Sometimes it is not grand apparitions or dramatic supernatural phenomena that shake people to their core, but small, quiet messages that appear suddenly and without explanation. Exactly such cases were documented by the American parapsychologist Diane Archangel in the 1990s. She collected reports from widows and widowers who described experiences that are almost impossible to comprehend. Again and again, grieving partners reported that, in moments of deep sorrow, they suddenly found small notes or pieces of paper written in the handwriting of their deceased spouses. Sometimes they appeared in drawers, in pockets, or seemed to materialize out of nowhere. And the messages were always simple, yet filled with meaning. I love you. Don't worry, my love. Or, I am always with you. One particularly striking account came from a woman who, weeks after her husband's death, decided to put on his old jacket. In the inner pocket, she found a note that looked freshly written, containing only one sentence in his unmistakable handwriting. Don't be afraid, I'm okay. For her, it was clear. He could not have left this note during his lifetime. It must have appeared in some inexplicable way after his death. Others reported that the notes appeared on days of special significance, such as wedding anniversaries or the deceased partner's birthday, almost as if the soul knew exactly when its message was needed most. Some even claimed that the note disappeared again after a short time, as if it had dissolved into thin air, even though they were absolutely certain they had deliberately placed it in a specific location. For Diane Archangel, these experiences were powerful indications that the connection between the living and the dead does not end with physical death. She viewed these handwritten messages as direct attempts from the afterlife to offer comfort and to make love tangible. Of course, these cases did not escape skepticism. Critics suggested forgotten notes or wishful thinking, but many of those affected emphasized that the handwriting looked fresh, the context was impossible to explain, and the messages appeared at exactly the moment they were needed most. So how can something like this possibly be explained? Do such notes truly arise through a force from beyond that can influence matter? Or are they projections of the subconscious, finding ways to heal in moments of profound grief? No matter which explanation one chooses, the effect was always the same: comfort, hope, and the deep certainty that love endures beyond death. A truly beautiful thought. What you are about to see next is not just the final case. It is the most powerful proof yet that death may not be the end. Number 1. Kenneth Ring, When the Blind See. During a near-death experience, what happens when people who have never seen before suddenly report colors, spaces, and faces during a near-death experience? This astonishing phenomenon became widely known in the 1990s through the work of the American psychologist Kenneth Ring. Ring was one of the leading researchers in the field of near-death experiences. He had already collected countless reports from people describing beings of light, tunnels, and out-of-body perceptions. But one question would not let him go. What happens to blind people when they come close to death? Can they also see during a near-death experience? Or is this experience purely visual and therefore impossible for them? To find out, he conducted a systematic study. He interviewed people who were either blind from birth or had completely lost their eyesight later in life. The results were so extraordinary that they remain among the strongest pieces of evidence for consciousness beyond the body to this day, because many of those interviewed reported that during their near-death experience, they suddenly saw things. Some described the operating room from above, the positions of the doctors, the equipment, the frantic activity during resuscitation. Others spoke of colors and shapes they had never known in everyday life. For people blind since birth, this was an entirely new dimension of perception. One particularly moving case involved a woman who had never seen in her entire life. She described rising out of her body during her near-death experience and watching the doctors at work. She precisely described which instruments were used, who stood where, and even what clothing the doctors were wearing. Later, the doctors confirmed that her descriptions were accurate, down to the smallest detail. For her, the experience was overwhelming, not only because she survived death, but because she was able to see for the first time in her life. Other blind participants reported encounters with deceased relatives. They recognized them not only by their voices, but also described what they looked like, their faces, hair, and clothing. For Kenneth Ring, this revealed a startling pattern. Blind people were able to perceive information during near-death experiences that they could never have accessed through their physical senses. And this was true regardless of whether they had ever been able to see during their lifetime or not. This turns our understanding of consciousness upside down, because if perception is not bound to the eyes, then seeing may be a function of the mind, or the soul, rather than a purely biological process. Of course, there were skeptics who argued that these accounts could be imagination or reconstructed memories, but many of the descriptions could be verified and matched reality with striking accuracy. Especially the precise details of things the individuals could never have known in everyday life are difficult to dismiss as mere fantasy. Kenneth Ring's work is therefore still considered one of the strongest indications that consciousness exists independently of the body. If even people who have never seen an image can suddenly have visual experiences near death, then the question becomes unavoidable. Are we ultimately more than just our bodies? Is consciousness a kind of independent entity that detaches from the body at the moment of death and gains access to an entirely new level of perception? Can we truly see, even when our eyes are long closed? An extraordinarily powerful insight. What do you believe? Is there life after death? Is there something like a soul that is immortal? Which case fascinated you the most personally? Write it in the comments below. We are very curious to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, we would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Thank you.